Islam is a religious, social, and political force of enormous importance. But despite this, in America and Europe, little or nothing is known about the second largest religion in the world, as well as the man behind its foundation, a man revered as a sacred prophet by a fifth of the world's population practicing the Muslim religion. And after many years of religious conflicts in the Middle East, there are not a few who have developed an adverse view towards this religion. But beyond what is thought of it, it is of great importance to know more about it and about its founder named Muhammad. So in this video, we are going to talk about the founding father of Islam, the merchant, the religious, the military, and the ruler who changed the history of a large part of the world. Reynaldo Carrillo speaks to you, and this is the New Encyclopedia. Muhammad was born on the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in Mecca, in what is now known as Saudi Arabia, around the year 570 after Christ, and he was part of the tribe called Quraysh, which was the most important in the city at that time. At that time, the Arabian area was disjointed, divided into small cities and towns inhabited by nomadic tribes and clans. Each of them had their own gods and goddesses, as well as different customs and interests. At that time, before the emergence of Islam, three different groups coexisted in the region. The Jews, the Christians, and the majority group known as the pagan Arabs, who worshipped and coexisted with multiple gods, although they considered one of these gods to be superior to the others, the god called Allah. The future prophet was born into a prominent family in Mecca, but his childhood was marked by the death of his relatives. His father died 6 months before his birth, and his mother died when he was only 6 years old. After the death of both parents, Muhammad was put under the care of his grandfather, but he died 2 years later, until he finally came under the care of his uncle Abu Talib. This uncle did not give him loving care, but rather Abu Talib was basically concerned with making sure Muhammad did not starve. But as he was a minor member of the family, it was culturally unacceptable to do more than that at that time. However, this does not mean that the child was completely rejected. Abu Talib, despite all this, instructed him in the world of commerce. He took the young man on a commercial caravan mission to Syria, and he eventually became a merchant, working in the exchange of goods between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Islam prohibits graphic representations of Muhammad or seriously limits them. However, there are some rare images made in antiquity. Ibn Sa'd, who was a major biographer, scribe, and follower of Muhammad during his lifetime, describes him as follows: "The apostle of Allah, may Allah bless him, is neither too short nor too tall. His hair is a blend of curly and straight. He is a man with black hair and a large skull. His complexion has a reddish tint. His shoulder bones are wide and his palms and feet are fleshy. He has long eyelashes, close eyebrows, a smooth and shiny forehead, and a wide space between his shoulders. When he walks leaning as if descending from a height. There was never a man like him, before or after him." According to the accounts of those who knew him, Muhammad was a man of excellent character, handsome, illiterate, and talented in many areas of life. As a 20-year-old merchant, he had earned a reputation for honesty and reliability. A story from another of Muhammad's biographers, Ibn Ishaq, claims that they trusted him so much that the leaders of the region asked him to act as a mediator in the conflicts that arose. When the central sanctuary of Mecca and the Arabian Peninsula, called the Kaaba, or also known as the Black Stone, was damaged in one of the frequent flash floods that occurred, it was Muhammad who was asked to mediate in a dispute between the leaders of the clans. There was a disagreement over who would put the last stone, the Black Stone, a sacred stone, back in the Kaaba. This activity was an honor, and the clan leaders could not decide who should receive the honor of returning the stone. Then Muhammad came up with a solution. He would put the black stone in a cloth, and then all the men holding the cloth at the same time would together place the stone. The cloak that was used for this ceremony, as well as the story of unity among the tribes, became an important Muslim symbol for poets and writers in the future. Muhammad would marry at 25 years old with Hadiyah, who was 40 years old. Hadiyah was a highly noble lady from Mecca, According to ancient accounts, up until then she had rejected the richest and most powerful men in Arabia, as she was looking for a man with character and a high level of ethics and morality. Muhammad and Hadiya had an extremely happy marriage. She was not only his wife, but also his friend, confidant, and moral support. They had 6 children together. And after her death, Muhammad would marry at least 10 more women, one of them being only 9 years old, according to some texts of Islam itself. Continuing with the story of who would become one of the most influential religious leaders in all of history, Muhammad lived years of peace, work, and harmony with his family. However, already in his 40s, he began to feel a personal crisis. He was discontent with his life. He found no sense in it. Until around the year 610, he would have his first divine revelation. Muhammad had become even more reflective and spiritual, and he routinely went to meditate in the cave of Hira. Muslims believe that one night that year, the Archangel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad, the same Archangel Gabriel from the Old and New Testament. Muslim tradition tells that Muhammad was terrified, and while trembling uncontrollably, the Archangel Gabriel indicated to him that he had been chosen as the last of the prophets to preach the word of Allah. Furthermore, the story tells that Muhammad described that the Archangel gave him the mandate to memorize and recite the verses that Allah was going to reveal to him. The Archangel approached him in the form of light and said, "Read, Muhammad, you have to read." And he replied, "But I don't know how to read." The angel Gabriel insisted until he dictated to Muhammad the first verses of the sacred book of the Muslims, the famous Quran. Muslim tradition says that Muhammad ran home terrified as he believed he was possessed. However, his wife Hadiya comforted him and assured Muhammad that he truly heard the word of God, and she convinced him that he was a prophet, his last prophet. So Muhammad began to spread in Mecca the reception of these revelations from God, and so, according to the Muslim faith, this is how Muhammad the merchant became Muhammad the prophet. Muhammad had assumed that he was Allah's chosen one to reveal to the world a new monotheistic religion. His message invited monotheism and the elevation of morality and conduct. After the first appearance of the Archangel Gabriel, Muhammad spent 3 years in deep meditation and prayer. However, during that time, he did not hear the voice of God or any of his messengers again. According to some accounts, Muhammad even came to doubt his first revelation, falling into deep sadness and despair, which even led him to consider throwing himself off a mountain. But after 3 years, God saw his steadfastness and spoke to him again. In this second revelation, Allah instructed Muhammad that he was ordered to actively spread his word and his message. And these messages that Allah would have transmitted to Muhammad are the ones that would eventually become the Quran, the sacred text of Islam. And it's important to note that for Muslims, the Quran was written by God Himself. While Muhammad was Allah's vehicle to transmit His word, he was the first human to receive and directly reveal God's messages. In the year 613, God told Muhammad to openly spread His word, and that's how Muhammad began a continuous phase of public preaching. Muhammad was preaching the religious virtues that would have been transmitted to him: the worship of Allah as the only God, prayer every day, charity, fasting, ordering good, prohibiting evil, and a whole religious and moral body that was embodied, as we already mentioned, in the Quran, which was written by his companions while they listened to him. Although the Quran and its teachings is a topic that merits another video. According to the accounts, Muhammad often pointed out that he was not preaching anything radically different from Judaism and Christianity. They worship the same God as Jews and Christians. Islam is seen by some experts as a continuation of the previous Abrahamic religions, that is, of Christianity and Judaism. However, Muslims assert that their religion is the final piece of God's message, and the Quran is the literal word of God, not corrupted by men. According to them, Muhammad would not have created a new religion, but would have restored the original monotheistic faith of Adam, Abraham, and the entire Abrahamic tradition. Another episode of great relevance, according to Islamic texts, was in the year 620, when Muhammad was visited again by the angel Gabriel. This time in the middle of the night in his own house, Gabriel brought with him the winged horse called Burak, the celestial steed of the prophets. Burak would take Muhammad on two journeys, one physical and the other spiritual. The physical journey would take him from Mecca to the farthest mosque, which was identified as the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. There, Muhammad prayed for good weather, and then his ascension to the heavens took place. According to the story, the angel Gabriel would have taken Muhammad to each of the 7 levels of heaven, where he met Adam, the first human being created by God, with John the Baptist, with Moses, with Abraham, and even with Jesus Christ, until finally Muhammad reached the highest of the 7 heavens, where he met God. God told Muhammad that he and his followers should pray 50 times a day. With the message in hand, Muhammad began to descend to earth. But along the way, Moses approached Muhammad and told him that 50 is too much and that he really should ask for less. Muhammad traveled 3 times between God and Moses until it was finally settled to make 5 prayers a day and that God would reward 10 times more. That's why Muslims pray 5 times a day. According to their worldview, God himself has ordered everyone to pray 5 times every day. This story is summarized in the Quran and told in detail in the Islamic indices. Both journeys are known as Isra and Miraj, and that night of ascension is one of the most celebrated nights by Muslims in their traditions. Additionally, these types of stories help us see that Islam has a more explicit relationship with Christian culture than many realize at first glance. While for them Jesus Christ is not the Son of God, they recognize him as one of God's main prophets. They recognize him as a being connected with the divine and with their culture. According to Muslims, the first man created by God, Adam, would also have been one of his prophets, continuing with Moses, Abraham, John the Baptist, Jesus, and now the last of the prophets, Muhammad. So returning to the life of our protagonist, the prophet of the Muslims began to preach in the Arabian region. Muhammad declared the unity of God, affirming that Allah is the only God and creator of everything. He preached about the service to God and the final judgment, about heaven and hell and surviving a dignified life by helping those who need it most, a pious life setting aside material wealth. This speech attracted crowds, and Muhammad made a name for himself in Arabia. Crowds of homeless, foreign, and poor people joined his plan, as Muhammad accepted good people regardless of their lineage or heritage. The rise of the prophet's speech began to bother the elites of the region. Muhammad became a problem as he gained more followers each day. Some tried to convince him with money to stop preaching, but he completely refused. They even tried to kill him, and his followers were mistreated and tortured in Mecca. The hostility in Mecca, where Muhammad and his followers were, led to the Muslims moving to Yashrib, now known as Medina, 13 years after he began his preaching in the year 622. Medina was a large agricultural oasis where he also had followers and where he established his political and religious authority. Breaking his ties with tribal loyalties and his families, Muhammad demonstrated that these ties were insignificant compared to his commitment to Islam, a revolutionary idea in the tribal society of Arabia. This Muslim migration to Medina is called the Hijra, and this moment marks the beginning of the year in the Islamic calendar. Muhammad, now in Medina, had an entire community devoted to his words and to the newly founded Islam. Even prominent and wealthy leaders of tribes and clans converted to Islam. In 624, Muhammad received a new revelation from Allah, who told him that when praying he should always stand with his forehead facing Mecca instead of doing it towards Jerusalem. Here we see why Muslims always face Mecca when praying. According to the Muslim worldview, God the Creator, the highest being, asked them not only to pray 5 times a day, but to pray towards Mecca. Now, the Prophet Muhammad, established in Medina, soon had to adopt a new facet in the face of the great challenges that were to be presented to him. Though he had departed, Mecca's leaders did not forget Muhammad. Relations between Mecca and Medina were rapidly deteriorating. All the properties of the Muslims in Mecca were confiscated, and violence towards them was continually escalating. This is how the war would begin, and a new facet of Muhammad, that of the military strategist. To win this conflict, Muhammad employed three broad military strategies. The first was to ally with the tribes surrounding Medina that could potentially harm the Muslim people. Secondly, he sent small groups to gather intelligence and win allies in Mecca and its surroundings as well. And thirdly, to raid the trade routes of Mecca. After these operations, the chiefs of Mecca decided to direct a direct retaliation against the Muslims, sending a small army to invade Medina. On the 15th of March, 624, at a place called Badr, both sides clashed. The armies of Mecca, who marched all night in the rain, tired and demoralized, faced the 300 Muslims who, in addition to being well located strategically, fought for God and their prophet. Although Muhammad's followers were numerically 3 times fewer than their enemies, 300 against 1,000, the Muslims won the battle. This was the first in a long series of military achievements by Islam. And it's important to note that this battle changed the course of Islamic history. They may not have known it at the time, but it was that battle that turned Muslims from a group of exiles into a force to be reckoned with, capable of defeating peoples and capable of conquering by force of arms, and Muhammad transformed from a pariah of Mecca into a major military leader. On the Mecca side, however, most of the leaders were killed, which allowed a man named Abu Sufyan to become the default leader of the place. Abu Sufyan needed to crush the Muslims in order to regain the lost prestige. Immediately after the Battle of Badr, he sent 3,000 men to directly attack Muhammad. The Prophet considered fighting behind the walls of Medina, but eventually went out with 700 men to the battle. But the lack of discipline caused the defeat of the Muslims, who retreated back to Medina with a Muhammad who was injured, but not seriously. Muhammad had another revelation and claimed that the defeat was a punishment from God for the disobedience of the Muslims, as well as a test of perseverance. Abu Sufyan received false news that Muhammad had died, so he laid down his arms and thought there was no need for more bloodshed. However, once in Mecca, he found out that Muhammad was still alive, so he decided to gather as many troops as possible to crush the Muslims once and for all. Abu Sufyan assembled 10,000 troops from Arab and Jewish tribes. Muhammad and his few troops were at a crossroads. They were unsure whether to fight openly or within Medina. In the end, they decided on a third option. Able-bodied men dug trenches on Medina's north side for 6 days, and every male over 14 years old would be part of the Muslim army. Muhammad was also able to get troops from neighboring tribes, thus having an army of 3,000 men in total. Everything was set for the battle. Finally, the Meccan troops arrived at the trenches. The trench dug by Muhammad's men, along with the natural fortifications of Medina, rendered Abu Sufyan's Confederate cavalry useless, and this put both sides in a stalemate. Awaiting the attacks, the Confederates convinced the Banu Qurayza, a Jewish tribe fighting with Sufyan, to attack the city from the south side. However, Muhammad's diplomacy destabilized the alliance forming against him between the tribes. The good organization of Muhammad's army, the low morale among Abu Sufyan's Confederates, and the poor weather conditions caused the siege to end in a fiasco. This event was called the Battle of the Trenches. The siege of the city was primarily a battle of wits, where the Muslims with very few casualties managed to defeat their opponents with a lot of diplomacy. The efforts to defeat Muhammad did not yield results. As a result, Islam became even more influential in the region, and the Muslims decided to besiege the Banu Qurayza, leading to their surrender. The defeat also caused Mecca to lose trade connections in the region and much of its prestige. A year after the Battle of the Trenches, the Muslims reached a 10-year peace agreement with the hostile tribes of Mecca, specifically with the Quraysh, who were the most important tribe. However, the treaty was short-lived. 2 other tribes in the region, the Banu Bakr and the Banu Qusa, were offered to ally with whoever they wanted within the peace agreement. Some allied with the Quraysh, while others allied with Muhammad in Medina. Due to old accounts and rivalries from many years ago, the Banu Bakr, those who had allied with the Quraysh in Mecca, ignoring the peace treaties, decided to attack the Banu Qusaa, and the Quraysh supported the aggressor tribe with weapons and men. The battle took place in Mecca. The Qusaa, allies of Muhammad, sought refuge in the sanctuary of the Kaaba, the Black Stone, a sacred place where blood should not be shed. However, the Banu Bakr hunted the enemy tribe and massacred everyone. Muhammad found out about what happened, and the Muslims assumed that it was necessary to settle accounts with the Quraysh. The Prophet decided it was time to go and take Mecca. This would bring a new major milestone for the Islamic religion. Muhammad gathered an army of 10,000 men, the largest Muslim army that had ever been assembled. Mecca is located in a valley surrounded by hills and slopes with 4 roads leading into the city. Muhammad divided his forces into 4, one for each road. The tactic was to attack Mecca at the same time from all these sides, with the intention that the defenders could not concentrate all their force on one side. And if they encountered strong resistance on one of the roads, they still had 3 more to launch a successful attack. And that's exactly what happened. One road faced some resistance, while the other 3 were peaceful and bloodless. Abu Sufyan handed over the historic city of Mecca to Muhammad and also decided to convert to Islam. With Mecca conquered, Muhammad visited the Kaaba with his companions and broke all the idols and gods. He gathered the people of Mecca at the Kaaba and proclaimed that there is no God but Allah. However, with the new power also came new enemies. Other tribes gathered to attack Muhammad, but they were defeated at the Battle of Hunain. On the other hand, to the north of Arabia, anti-Islamic policies were adopted, and Muhammad gathered an army of 30,000 men to battle against these groups. However, Muhammad did not encounter hostile forces, but rather received the submission of several of the local leaders of that region. The last city that resisted the Muslims in Western Arabia was Taif, and Muhammad, when attacking this city, flatly refused to accept its surrender until they agreed to convert to Islam. This period marked the unification of Arabia and the beginning of the rapid expansion of Islam around the world. Decades after the death of Muhammad, his Muslim followers bravely conquered Persia, Palestine, Egypt, Syria, Armenia, and much of North Africa, as well as twice besieging Constantinople, although they could never take it. Starting from 711, Islam began its struggle to conquer the Iberian Peninsula and parts of Western Europe. At 62 years of age, Muhammad finally completed his first true Islamic pilgrimage, and with it established a precedent for the so-called Great Pilgrimage that Muslims undertake every year to Mecca. Muhammad knew that his life was about to come to an end, and he gave a farewell sermon on Mount Arafat, east of Mecca. In his speech, he compiled some of the most important teachings of his preaching: the consideration of the life and property of all Muslims as sacred, the prohibition of usury, not to aggress anyone so that no one would aggress them, the rights between husbands and wives, as well as advised his followers not to follow certain pre-Islamic traditions, and expressed that Arab men and non-Arab men and whites and blacks, none had superiority over the other except in piety and good deeds. Months after the speech, Muhammad would die of natural causes. The Prophet fell ill with fever and was buried in his home. The Green Mosque of Medina is located there today. During his life, the Prophet Muhammad managed to unify the Arabian Peninsula and establish Islam as a religious, social, and political force. A religion that today has nearly 1.6 billion practitioners. This same religion conquered a significant segment of the world and led to the fall of Byzantium, the last of the Roman empires, more than 800 years later. After the death of Muhammad, the Islamic Caliphate expanded from Arabia to where Pakistan and Spain are today. With the death of Muhammad, disagreement also erupted over who should be his successor. The dispute arose between Abu Bakr, Muhammad's friend and collaborator, and Ali Abi Talib, his cousin and son-in-law. This fight divided the Islamic faith in two, creating the famous division between Sunnis and Shiites, a division that still strongly persists among Muslims. In this way, Muhammad, a strong and charismatic man, was undoubtedly one of the most influential figures in the last 2,000 years of humanity, with the Muslim religion today present in almost all countries of the world, regardless of what one may think of it, which also enjoys a strength and a growth rate among its practitioners that is not seen in many other religions today. Thank you for watching. This is Reynaldo Carrillo. This was the New Encyclopedia. Remember to like, share, and comment. Thanks for your support. See you next episode.